Alright, so for our first big scale project here, I'm having you guys go through and work on creating some kind of action, some kind of verb, using a flour sack. Now, flour sacks are pretty traditional in the world of animation as far as learning how to make things move, because they don't really have bones or anything necessarily, but they do have a good sense of weight and distribution and movement and timing and everything. So what I've done here, I just have my kind of my general project here. My action was kicking a soccer ball. That was the one that I chose. And so I did mine kind of short here. Yours are going to be a minimum of about 10-ish seconds. Mine is significantly shorter for the sake of the demo. But you'll notice that as I'm going along here, I am kind of slowly but surely plugging in different circles to get kind of a generic feel of the overall motion. Alright, so then the next step here, I've gone through and made sure that my spheres all have a sense of movement, kind of an overall arc. I'm going to have my flour sack kind of jump in the air and kick a little soccer ball. So then the next idea is to go through and start thinking about each one of these scribbly circles that I made for each keyframe, almost as two circles. One for the a smaller one for the top kind of upper torso of the flour sack, and then a smaller one, or excuse me, a larger one for the bottom, kind of where the weight of the flour sack would be. Almost like a think like a snowman. That's a good way of thinking about it. So I'm going through and just drawing over top of each of these kind of keyframes on a separate layer. And this does sound like a lot of work, but I promise you it goes by really, really quickly because the animation's already done. The ball already moves. I'm just adding in a little bit of extra detail. So I'm not thinking about how much to move it. I've already done that. So this process really kind of speeds up along the way. Alright, so now at this point I've gone through and I've thought to myself about this kind of snowman look. Now I'm just kind of playing around. I want to find the right pen size for what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to try and think about my flour sack as a three-dimensional object. The idea basically being that if this sack was real, maybe it has like some stitching on the side of it. So I'm going to use this kind of simplistic little line right here to kind of show where the side of my flour sack would be. So that way I'm kind of thinking about kind of a front half and a side half as opposed to these circles which don't really have any kind of defining shape or size or kind of rotation. It allows me to think about that my flour sack is more of a three-dimensional object as opposed to this kind of two-dimensional outline that it kind of inevitably becomes. So I'm thinking about kind of my seam. Now remember too, you don't have to do your animation in this particular style that I'm showing you. I'm just kind of showing you the different ways that you can go through just by adding on a second layer and kind of slowly going back and forth, back and forth. Try your best to not animate perfectly on your first frame. I know there's a weird tendency to want to do that, but I promise you, you can always go back and make alterations and changes later. If you try to animate and draw perfectly your first time around, it just doesn't work out all that well. So instead, you can see how I'm making multiple levels, multiple layers, just making sure that the movement and animation and everything is kind of correct. Next up, I'm going to start thinking about kind of the overall leg of where he's going to be kicking this little soccer ball, and I'm thinking about how it's going to look. And notice how now I'm just going back and forth between my keyframes that already exist, and I'm slowly adding on a little bit of extra detail, thinking about kind of before the kick, after the kick, and all that. So again, not really thinking about the body of the flour sack, just making sure that that kick actually works. Alright, so now what I'm going to go ahead and do is throw on a just a circle, a sphere for my soccer ball. Obviously, whenever his foot connects with that soccer ball, just like with our ball bounce, there's going to be a little squash and stretch to it. Once I have that keyframe, notice I'm putting it in the middle on a new layer just for the ball. Once I have that keyframe in there, then I'll start kind of going backwards and forwards, kind of in reverse and forward. thinking about where the ball is going to and where the ball is coming from. I'm also going to go ahead on another layer and put on a kind of a path of action. I'm going to think about how many frames I have to get to that collision of the foot and the soccer ball, and how many frames I have until that ball goes off screen. That way I can make sure that my timing works out really, really well. And of course, I'll just delete that, that kind of path of action layer whenever I'm done with it, because I don't really need it. Alright, so now I've got my path of action. My ball moves in the same step with my character jumping up in the air. I'm going to make another layer here real quick and just kind of go back over it. I'm going to go really kind of quick for the sake of this demo. I probably would take a little bit more time to put some more detail in my flour sack, but I'm just going to go ahead and grab kind of a thick paintbrush here and just kind of basically give my flour sack kind of some kind of outline. And again, I'm thinking about that little seam as far as where its side is opposed to where its front is. Think about the overall weight of kind of those two spheres that make up his overall body and where his weight is being kind of distributed. And then also, for the sake of a little bit of emotion, I'm giving those little kind of flour sack kind of ties on the two on the top and two on the bottom. Almost, if you want to think about the carpet from Aladdin had those little kind of tassels that he used as like hands and emotion. We're going to do the same thing here too. And again, I'm going really quickly. You would definitely want to spend a little bit more time on the detail of your flour sack than I am. But for the sake of the demo, you can see I'm just going one frame at a time. And you can always go back and change your keyframes if you want to. But I'm thinking about kind of squash and stretch and really everything we've talked about so far. Alright, so the very last step I'm going to do, probably I would want to color in my character as well, maybe use the paint bucket or something like that, but I'm going to go ahead and add another layer. I know, gosh, how many layers? I'm going to add another layer, and I'm going to go ahead and put a shadow underneath not only my flour sack, but also the soccer ball as well. You'll see that in a second. And the idea would be that the fact that he's jumping, to really emphasize this jump, that shadow is going to really push things as far as how far away from the ground he actually is. It gives the whole scene a sense of weight and kind of placement in the universe, as opposed to just kind of just kind of floating in the sky. So anytime you have a chance to add some kind of shadow, it helps. I could even add in kind of a shadow on maybe the side of the flour sack as opposed to painting him one solid kind of flat cell-shaded color. That would again add in another sense of depth and really give it a more of a three-dimensional kind of feel. But whenever it's all said and done, I'll let it play through here a couple times at the very end. And that's our generic kind of overview for a flour sack animation. Remember, layers are your friend, just like in Photoshop.